Now, the Christian Action Network has released the new film Islam Rising, which deals with this problem. Martin Moyer, the director, is here to tell us much about this problem. What inspired you to make this movie?
Well, what inspired us to make this film is that we had heard rumors that Europe is about ready to collapse under the rule of Islam. And we left for Europe last year, spent a month and a half in countries such as England and Brussels and Germany and France and the Netherlands. And we were quite shocked about what we saw, that indeed Islam is about ready to conquer Europe. Then we heard about Geert Wilders' speech that he was going to make in Boca Raton, Florida, and we went and listened to him. Geert Wilders is a parliamentarian out of the Netherlands who lives under a death threat for producing a film called Fitna that helped educate people in Europe about the dangers of radical Islam. We watched that film, we heard his speech, and we thought this has to be put together for Americans. They need to see what will happen in our country if the same radical seeds of Islam is being sown here that is now being sown in Western Europe.
When did this start becoming a problem?
This is an issue that's probably been going on in Europe for the last 40 years. It started with mass immigration of Muslims that are now allowed to have polygamous marriages and produce a birth rate that's 4 times higher than the native European population. And they develop in small communities that become larger. And look, in France alone, there are 700 no-go zone areas in which non-Muslims are suggested never to enter. Now, these no-go zone areas, just as in some imagination, these are the actual listed no-go zone areas on the French website that says do not enter into these areas. And you have to ask yourself a question, is that why would any country allow an Islamic rule to take place in communities that are under their own government and suggest that non-Muslims not enter in? So this has been going on for quite some time throughout Europe. It's very alarming. It's very frightening. In Sweden, they have something called rape jihad among the Muslims, which says basically that non-Muslims are your... And England, they have Sharia courts that allows Muslims to set up their own judicial system. People are being assassinated and threatened with assassination for criticizing Islam in England. This is a very dangerous time over there, and we're beginning to see these same seeds sown here in the United States.
Don't you think this is political correctness gone insane?
You know, political correctness is basically an ideology that liberals say we don't want you to criticize a certain race, ethnic, religion. This goes much beyond political correctness. These are actually death threats being made by Muslims and also governments that want to arrest you if you criticize Islam. Not because the governments really care that you oppose Islam, but they're so afraid of the Islamic rule in certain communities in their countries, so afraid that they will actually carry out a terrorist attack against the government that they want to put people in jail for criticizing it. It's much deeper than just plain political correctness.
Well, what's your opinion on the rise of Islam here in the United States?
Well, there's a lot of things going on in the United States that many listeners of yours probably have not heard about. For instance, in the Byron Unified School District in California, children were asked to chant praise be to Allah. They were asked to profess as true that the Holy Quran is God's word. They were asked to wear the Muslim moon and the crescent star and Muslim moon around their necks to class. These weren't just suggestions. They were required to do this in class, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld that requirement for these students. This is shocking. If a Muslim student was asked to chant praise be to Christ or asked to wear the cross around their neck, obviously, we all know the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals would have struck this type of class down. So Americans need to understand this is going on here. In the NYSA school district in Oregon, children were asked to say Muslim prayers. They had to learn the 5 pillars of the Muslim faith. They had to dress up as Muslims to come to class. This stuff is going on in the United States. We need to wake up.
Are you talking about Muslim schools?
No, these are in public schools, not Muslim schools. They're in public schools. It's shocking. People probably are going to have a difficult time believing this, and so did we when we heard about these cases. In the Byron Unified School District, it so shocked me that some court, any court, could uphold a class that asked students to chant praise be to Allah, I had to go read the court's opinion on this. What possible logic could they be using to say this is a constitutional class? Well, what the court said is that, witchcraft is allowed in the public schools in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals because it is a role-playing game. Therefore, they said, well, these students aren't really being forced to become Muslims, even though they're asked to chant praise be to Allah. They're simply role-playing being Muslims. Or can you imagine throwing this on a Muslim student and saying, we're not really asking you to become a Christian, we're just asking as a role-playing game for you to wear this cross, to dress up as a Christian, or to chant praise be to Christ.
How are European governments playing into the hands of the Muslim extremists?
When we went to Europe and we asked people there as to why would the state sponsor this type of radical Islamic activity in their country, this is what they told us, that the state governments are afraid of radical Islam. They're afraid that they're going to be attacked. And they have a blind eye, and Muslims know they have a blind eye toward this Islamic law because they don't want to be attacked. We saw sort of that taking place here in New York City, where someone placed a car bomb inside of Times Square. How many car bombs will go off in a city before you're now afraid of this type of Islamic retaliation, before you then begin to say, okay, we'll just give you your way? This is what's happening in Europe. They are under the spell of these Islamic terrorist attacks. They're so afraid of them, they want to help the Muslims take control of their communities.
Is this why a lot of people in the Netherlands are now supporting Geert Wilders?
I think when we went over there and we spent time in the Netherlands, there's many people over there that are opposed to the radical Islamic ideology. The problem is that they will support Geert Wilders, but they're afraid to speak out. Because in Western Europe, you do not have the same free speech rights that we have in the United States. If you dare to speak out against Islam there, you can be arrested for offending that religion. That's why Geert Wilders is under trial right now for his film Fitna. And that trial will take place in October, but he offended Muslims. And the country of the Netherlands says that is not what we want you to do. It is against our laws, and therefore we will put you in jail for doing so. So people in Europe are afraid to speak out, not only because they might be assassinated for criticizing Islam, but because they could be arrested and they could lose their jobs for doing so.
What percentage of Muslims do you believe are devout?
That's a very good question, because many Muslims are very peaceful, and they have no intention to demand Islamic law be placed on non-Muslims. Many of them themselves do not want Islamic law placed on themselves. What happened in Europe is that communities develop, and then radical imams start taking control of those communities, and they force Islamic law on those peaceful Muslims who have no other choice but to abide by it and then become radicalized, because that is the only imams, the only community centers, the only mosques that are setting up in their communities.
What's been the reaction to Geert Wilders' film Fitna?
The reason why we produced Islam Rising that includes Fitna is because many people in the United States have not seen this film. Previously, it had only been an internet-based film. You had to go on the internet and watch it. So if you didn't know it was there, you didn't see it. Our goal as Christian Action Network is to distribute his film, Fitna, and that's inside of our film, Islam Rising, so many, many Americans can see what he has to say about radical Islam. Now, his film is only about 18 minutes long, but what it does, it shows what the Quran says, and then it shows interviews and graphic detailed pictures of what radical Muslims are doing to carry out the instructions of the Quran. It's very enlightening, it's very shocking, and it will give Americans the education they need as to what really is in the Quran and what these Muslim extremists are really about.
Well, how